An inverted yield curve is really never good for the stock market or for the economy as a whole. That said, it's not necessarily grounds for an imminent panic either. I think it's a matter of degree. One thing to keep in mind is when you see an inversion of the yield curve, it often, but not always, signals a recession sometime down the road, about 10 months to 12 months down the road. Markets are forward-looking mechanisms, so that clearly does spook a stock market as it thinks about the fact that the bond market may be signaling an imminent recession. One thing to keep in mind here is inverted yield curve has different terms to different people. Some people would say 3 to 10, 3-month bills versus 10-year notes. Well, there's an inversion there. An inversion, by the way, let me back up for those of you who are not familiar with the jargon. A normal yield curve is when you see shorter-term rates lower than longer-term rates. This is logical. The longer you lend someone money, the more risk you have that they will pay you back, or the more things that can interrupt your payment flow. And so as a result, the normal yield curve is upward sloping when you look at when you have maturity in the bottom at the left and maturity rising from left to right on the x-axis, and the y-axis being the yield. So in this case, what we see is 3-month rates have started to become higher than 10-year rates. That's pretty unusual. It does happen, but it's rarely a good thing. Some people will say that the yield curve is not really inverted because two-year notes and 10-year notes are actually roughly yielding about the same. The 10-year is yielding slightly more than the 2-year, so some people feel that's a better signal. All in all, none of this is good. What it implies is that there's risk of either lower rates in the future or deflation, which the Fed would really only take that path. The Fed would take the interest rate path and the market would take the deflation path. But either of those would happen only in the event of some sort of economic stress. So what I would say here is it's not necessarily a reason to go running, screaming for the exits. I think what we saw last week sort of was the wake-up call that this is bad, and then the momentum sort of fed upon itself. But I would start to worry that the market's telling you a fairly negative story right now. The bond market's telling the equity market a fairly negative story. Whether or not the equity market chooses to listen, that's up to its own devices. It also means you can successfully have equities move higher despite the stress in the bond market. There's no reason why it can't, at least from the short term, or until the situation resolves itself. But going forward, you really have to keep an eye on this, and you really have to wonder what it's telling you. And again, the story it's telling you is not necessarily positive right now.